Over the weekend, Elon Musk tweeted that he has certain concerns about the controversy about rich people not paying taxes on unrealized gains in the market, and that he therefore, if Twitter polls say yes, would be willing to sell some shares and pay taxes, etc., etc. I'm not going to go into the details. The conversation has two interesting points that I want to discuss. One is the question of paying taxes on unrealized gains. I am a staunch opponent of that for just pure social macroeconomic reasons. Second, I also want to discuss about the fact that even engaging into a conversation like that, even just the engagement itself, I think is a very dangerous precedent, and I therefore discourage Musk and anybody else to even discuss this in this type of form, because I think it can lead to unintended consequences that are very dangerous. This is a very dangerous topic. We're on very thin ice as a society here, because we're already on the brink of destroying a lot of productive energy in this country, in this economy. And I think we need people like Elon Musk to focus on productivity and not engage in these types of conversations that are very anti-productive. This is the Not Even Wrong podcast. It's November 8, 2021. This is Krim Delko. For the day, the fund is down 2.2%. The market is up 11 basis points. For the year, we are up 58.6%. The market is up 22.8%. We're outperforming by 35.6%. I'm not going to go into the details of what happened over the weekend. You can check that out. The gist is that Musk is willing to sell some shares to appease concerns about unrealized gains and not paying taxes on realized gains. Here's why paying taxes on unrealized gains is a terrible idea. There's two reasons. Wealth is generated through compound rate of interest. The compound rate of interest is what really generates wealth. It has been like that for centuries, millennia. It's the compound interest is, but the compound interest is the sort of mathematical reason why wealth is generated. What really generates wealth is the compound rate of knowledge and the compound rate of productivity, and anything else that you do which is for some reason useful to somebody else, or a market, or an ecology, or whatever environment you're in. You're not going to generate wealth unless you do something useful. This is the fundamental reason of Darwinism, the free market economy, and all other kinds of ideas that we've had in the past. Free market economy is just nomenclature. It's just a name for something. What it really means is a lot more Popperian or Darwinistic, which is we find a niche, we change through a mutation, we generate knowledge, either explicit knowledge such as or explanatory knowledge like we have humans, or non-explanatory knowledge like genetic type knowledge. It doesn't matter. Some sort of knowledge is generated which can exploit a certain niche or create something in a niche within the ecology that you're operating, and that is something that nature then gives you a feedback, and it's a good thing, and therefore you keep growing and you keep growing and you keep growing. This is what wealth generation really means. Or in other words, generating freedom or the ability to access resources. Wealth generation is highly correlated to freedom. Freedom means access to resources. Freedom means agency. Freedom means the ability to do, to use Chiara Marletto's nomenclature, to do counterfactuals. So freedom means we have more options to do this or that. And the more options we have to do this or that, the more wealth we can generate again, because in the end, any kind of explanatory knowledge is created by exploring counterfactuals. Knowledge is generated by exploring counterfactuals. Should I do this or should I do that? In the end, this is how we generate knowledge. Knowledge is created by exploring counterfactuals and then creating explanatory knowledge on top of that. So once we try a lot of different ways to do something, we find a good way to do it, we then explain why that works, and then we go from there, and we create even better problems out of the problem that we just solved, and then we build what Jim McKelvey calls an innovation stack, and those are sort of the fundamental ideas that I think we at Orange Capital Partners abide to, that I think people like Karl Popper, David Deutsch would abide to. This is the fundamental idea of disruption, and so on and so forth. Now, if paying taxes on unrealized gains would mean that you take away this ability to compound interest, to compound knowledge, to compound wealth generation from a productive innovation stack building process, and you give it to the government. Now, that has two fundamental implications which are negative. Number one, the government, unfortunately, is not a productive source of energy. And the reason it's not productive is not necessarily because the government per se is a bad thing or anything like that. It's just that the government, the way we function right now, today in 2021, in this society, unfortunately, has lost its track in terms of having a purpose. The purpose of government is to serve its citizens. The purpose of government is to raise funds to then spend them in productive ways. This purpose, unfortunately, has gone way by the wayside. Where we stand today is that we are, in a very nonchalant way, able to just say things like tax the rich, or take money from them and give it to others, and all that stuff. The purpose of government always has to be to first and foremost formulate a need for spending money, and then find resources to spend money. So taxation can always only be after the fact. It can only happen once we've formulated a reason to spend money, for whatever reason it is, and not just out of principle or out of some political reason or some sort of equity or any of that stuff. If you want to pursue equity, there are ways to pursue equity. Education, for example, is one. You can also help by lifting people out of poverty, by giving them certain abilities to generate assets for themselves. It's the old saying, if you give a fisherman a fish, you feed him one day. If you teach him how to fish, you will give him fish for the rest of his life. So those are sort of the concepts which work, the concepts that people in the political sphere are using, the idea of redistribution and all these things. They don't work not because they're bad ideas, it's just that because the way we implement them is not right. And to confound the concept of taxing unrealized gains with this convoluted concept of, let's say, income distribution and all these kinds of things, it's a dangerous path, because it's bad policy on top of other bad policies, and it just creates a big mess that will not yield the results that we're actually looking for. Because in reality, what's going to happen is that the productive assets will leave the country, that therefore the people that are supposed to be helped, which is the people in the lower echelons of society in terms of economic activity, will even have less opportunity, and they will either be forced to go somewhere else, or God knows what could happen, even a war or something like that. So fundamentally, the problem here is that we're going after the one source in this body. If we take the analogy of medicine, the body of a government has healthy parts and unhealthy parts. The unhealthy parts are definitely the government sector and the political sector in this country that are sclerotic. And then we have a very healthy part, and I'm talking about the USA now. Other countries don't have that, but we have a healthy part, which is an innovative, sort of counterfactual seeking, disruptive sector in the economy, particularly Silicon Valley and tech, but also other sectors. And that is driving future prospects for people, in particularly young people. If you really summarize, the purpose of a state is to set a boundaries of incentives for people to operate in. That's what a state does. And if there's any purpose whatsoever for getting up in the morning, really, if you look at it from a sort of, if you looked from way above, you're an alien, you come down to Earth, and the alien looks at us, and then after a while they think, okay, what's the purpose of these people? I think one of the answers will be, well, these people create a future for their kids. Because that's really what we do. When we really think long term, that's what we do. We might not explicitly say that, but that's what we do. Because you can ask the most selfish, the most whatever you want to call person, you can ask them, what is it you want to do on your deathbed? And that is, it's always going to be something along the lines, well, I want to leave my fortune to my kids. Or maybe if you're less selfish, you want to say something like, I want to create a world that is better for the future of generation. I think nobody would argue with that. So it is somehow innate in our species that we're trying to leave a better place for the next generation and so on and so forth, particularly in the United States. Again, the United States is a very special place when it comes to these things. Other places are different. I'm talking about the United States. I'm focusing because this is where I focus my most energy on when it comes to these macroeconomic and political questions. And by the way, I just want to apologize. This podcast is a little bit political, this particular episode, and the purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense for what it feels like to run a hedge fund. It is not a macroeconomic podcast whatsoever. I am trained as an economist in my undergrad studies, so I can't resist to think about these topics every now and then. I also went to the University of Chicago, where I was even in my grad school years, where I was trained even more thoroughly to think about these things. So there's a certain love, a certain affinity on my side to think about these things. That's why I'm also discussing these types of topics. So let's get back on point here. The problem with taxing unrealized gains is that you're taking away the ability to compound, you're taking away the incentive to compound, and you're taking away the incentive, therefore, the innate incentive of people to create a better place for future generations. And that is very, very dangerous. It is not going to succeed, it is not going to lead to what we call income equality or equity or any of that stuff. It is not going to have that effect either. So whatever you're trying to achieve, you're not going to achieve it, and you're going to destroy the goose that lays the golden egg. This is, in short, why I am terribly opposed to this idea. Now, what the consequences could be is anybody's guess, but I can absolutely assure anybody that it is not going to lead to more equity and more equality, because equity and equality can only be achieved, and this is, I don't know if I can prove this mathematically, but I can certainly prove it anecdotally. You go back to socialism, you go back to European type socialism, you go back to any kind of attempt by central powers, coercion and all these things to try to create more equity. It always ends up in even less equity and less equality. Soviet Union is a terrible example, but there's other examples with less dramatic consequences that still prove the point. Back to the point, so you will not achieve that. You will not achieve the equity and the equality that you're looking for. The only way to achieve that in a society where you genuinely want people to have better futures, in a society where you implicitly or explicitly, I don't care which one it is, where you have the tendency to try to replace certain ideas with better ideas. If that's your goal, if that's the society you're built on, which our society is according to our constitution, if this is what you're trying to achieve, if you're trying to give, let's say, underprivileged people a better future, if those are the types of goals you're trying to pursue, if you are looking to do that in a least coercive way possible, not because you have some sort of moral objection to coercion, it's just because it doesn't work. Coercion doesn't work. Coercion is a very expensive way to get things done. It requires armies, it requires brutality, torture, all that kinds of stuff, and it doesn't usually lead anywhere, and people leave, and then you don't have people to work with, and all that stuff. So if that's your goal, you will not achieve it by coercing people, taking money away from productive assets. Now, you can also make that same, you can say, well, people made that argument about income tax, about realized gain tax, so what's wrong with this? I think there is a slight difference. If you realize gains from an investment, you have made an explicit decision to get out of a productive asset and reallocate your your money, and then maybe that's okay if you then pay taxes on that. I mean, I even think there that the conversation is certainly why should we tax risk capital, because the risk capital is really the sort of the lubricant that oils the economy. So why should we tax that? But then that's a different conversation. But to tax unrealized gains again would create a terrible disruption of the incentive structure in the society, and also lead to capital flight. Plus, we have Bitcoin and things like that now, so we have the ability to not even be coerced by the community of governments at this point. It would just create a very bad precedent, I think, for people to then invest into the future. Again, if the purpose of this whole endeavor here that we call U.S. economy is to create a better place for our future generations, then taxing unrealized gains is a very bad idea. Now, the second aspect I want to discuss is the fact that Musk is even discussing this, and I think it is very dangerous to discuss bad ideas and relate to them in a sort of way where you actually accept them as being even worthy of a discussion. I don't think that debate and discussion is always warranted. In this case, I think we should have a different stance. We should refuse to accept that this is an idea that is even contemplatable, other than say, look, if you coerce me, then that's different. But if you don't coerce me, if we have a discussion which is based on free will and agency and the democratic process and all these things, then I am not going to discuss this, because it's a bad idea. This is like discussing should black people be allowed to vote or not, or something like that. This is not a basis of discussion anymore. We're not going to discuss this. Or should women work in the workplace? If I even engage and start, well, what is a woman, and is a woman really productive? That's not okay. We have to assume certain things are bad, and for example, even attenuating or I don't know, even mentioning the fact that, let's say, women shouldn't be working is a bad thing. So we shouldn't be even discussing those types of topics. What we should be discussing is simply, okay, look, what's the goal? And how can we pursue that goal in the best possible way with the least possible coercion? I think this is how our country works. This is how this society works, this experiment called the US Constitution and the subsequent country that came out of that was built on. This is what I think is the best way to go forward. It might not suit everybody's idea, but that's okay. That's what Popper would say too. I mean, it's great. Different ideas make good markets for ideas. Bring it on. Let's see what you got. But let's discuss them and find better solutions. There are solutions for equity. Like I said, education is always a good one. It has proven to be very good in many, many ways. There are other ways. There's also a way of safety net and things like that. I'm not against any of that stuff. But again, this is not the political side of this conversation. I'm talking more about the economic side, and in particular about what it means for asset allocators for us. Because this is now the conclusion of this particular episode. I am in the business of allocating assets to productive assets. So that's what I do. And if you start taxing me for unrealized gains, I'm going to allocate those assets somewhere else. And I'm not the only one. So that's in reality what's going to happen. Now, somebody in the government might say, well, I'm going to go catch you, put you in jail and all that. Fine, if that's what you want to do, but you're then destroying the golden goose that lays the eggs. If that's what you want to do, well, I don't know, we're in Bolshevism, Leninism, things like that. That's okay. I have to run away. Things happen, bad things happen. But if we agree that we're not in this type of situation, that we don't want to become some sort of central bad government, then you should agree that my concern is really serious. Again, I'm in the business of allocating assets to productive assets. If you chase me away, you're going to lose a very important part of the fabric of this particular economy and society. That should concern you. By the way, when I say me, I mean my sector, not me personally. I think fundamentally what I'm trying to say here is that you cannot coerce people into things. You should try to avoid that, because you never know who's going to coerce you tomorrow. So if you think you can walk around and raise taxes on unrealized gains, maybe you feel good about yourself for a while, and then somebody else gets hold of the government and power, and then they're going to do something that really does that pisses you off. Let's say they will do tax breaks for gun companies or something like that. So let's just be clear that the political process works both ways, at least in our. If you're a central power like Lenin or something, then yeah, you can monopolize power and just make sure that nobody ever has a different opinion and incentive structure than yours, but we're not in that type of situation. Lastly, I want to say one more thing about this unrealized gain tax, actually, which is also a very serious problem, and that is it would create a police state. It would give the IRS and whoever else is involved, accountants, enormous powers, because they would need them to be able to even execute against that strategy. And that would create a police state. It would create evasion, avoidance. It would just waste so much of our productive capacity, of just brain power. People that go to college would end up doing accounting, for example, for these types of tax situations, instead of doing accounting maybe for disruptive companies and help them grow and things like that. So I'm just saying this is a bad precedent that would create a police state, the same way, by the way, that income tax and realized gain tax have created already a minuscule police state when we talk about IRS and things like that. There are countries in Europe that have the wealth tax or unrealized gain tax, which is kind of the same thing. France, Italy, Spain, and they're terrible countries when it comes to economic growth, opportunity, and all these things. So to summarize, again, if the goal is to create a better future for the next generation, the best path forward is to have a conversation and find solutions for the problem, and then find better solutions for the new problems we create and go forward that way. It is much better to do it that way than to use coercion. To coerce people into paying taxes on unrealized gains will create a terrible incentive structure, and it will create a police state when it comes to collecting and monitoring all that, which is a terrible waste of resources, and it would not lead to anything. And in particular, it would not actually deliver the goal that maybe most people, well, maybe not everybody, but at least the people that have genuine good intentions, I think they want more equity and more equality and things like that. And you're not going to get that with those types of taxes. You're going to get that with productive, growing economies that invest in education and that build a safety net around products and services and things like that help people get jobs, help people get education, help people that fall out of the system get back in the system. All these kinds of things are necessary to have a more just society. Thank you.